New South Wales Energy Minister Matt Kean has had a change of heart, it would seem, when it comes to the freight industry, creating a grandfather agreement that will see freight train drivers able to keep their current stock rolling and new EPA pollution rules applying only to new trains. Andrew Clennell, he's our Sky News political editor. He knows New South Wales politics inside out. He joins me right now. I have to say, mate, this is a bit of a joke because it will grandfather existing rolling stock, but all the new stock, which will make it even harder, I suppose, to bring in new stock, will be subject to all of these new green laws. I'm not convinced this is any better than where he was a couple of days ago. And of course, it's just likely to mean more trucks on the road.
Yes, well, from my understanding, John Barilaro kind of ambushed Kean here because he just went straight out in the press and whacked him with it. And this is a real issue for the New South Wales government, this war, and it can't be called anything else, between the Deputy Premier and Matt Kean. And they're completely opposite ends of the political spectrum. And, you know, they're throwing punches at each other, and Gladys Berejiklian isn't really intervening. She's just letting the war go out in public, often in the pages of the Telegraph. And it's quite an extraordinary situation. Now, as leader, she should really be getting them together and saying, hey, sort it out behind closed doors. But outside of that, in terms of the issue itself, the accusations Barilaro is making behind the scenes is that Kean is captive of his department, he's being a bit of a yes minister, and he's really, you know, advocating strongly for that department. Of course, you know, at state government level, you often see the Environment Minister do the deed of their department and the Mining Minister on the other side, but it seems more acute here. And I guess Kean's easily more open to attack, particularly when he's been attacking the federal government over issues like climate change.
Well, I mean, this didn't blow up until Barilaro drew it to the minister's attention that this was happening in his own department. So that's I think, a black mark against Kean's management of his own portfolio. But there's been another litany of other, you know, areas where he's wanted the army to go in and help privately owned companies who provide power services now in New South Wales to basically prop them up. Now, I don't think they would have been rebating the taxpayer, the shareholders of these power companies, but this is where he sort of wanders his political way in and gets, I think, the Berejiklian government into trouble. So we'll see how it all plays out. We are talking about 25,000 trucks, B-doubles, headed onto roads if Matt Kean doesn't sort of sort this out. I'll come back to John Barilaro in a minute because his name comes up in a federal context again today. But there was a fair amount of speculation today that there's pressure on Anthony Albanese, isn't there, that he rethinks the Labor Party's opposition to nuclear power. Some inside Labor and certainly the unions, we know the CFMEU in Victoria has been pushing hard with a submission to the Victorian Parliament, but they're saying if you're going to have this target, net zero emissions by 2050, it's uncosted, there's no real plan. Mate, they say, Albo, you've got to have nuclear in it. Is he going to rethink this?
I don't think he is, but I mean, he's from the left after all, and they've, you know, gone to many party conferences opposing that. But I think it's interesting. It looks, I mean, the Australian reported today that it looks like Angus Taylor in his technology roadmap will at least talk about the possibility of modular nuclear reactors. I don't think he'll support them as such, but I guess that's a bit of a wedge the government can use on Labor in terms of their target. The other big thing that can be used against Albanese on this, Peter, of course, is that Boris Johnson has adopted that target for the UK, but he's done so with a lot of nuclear energy in play. So I think people who, including the unions who want nuclear energy, can easily point to that and say, OK, you want the target, and you say Boris Johnson has the target, but this is how he's achieving it, and that's a path that you're not prepared to go down, but it is one way very much towards achieving that target.
Look, and as is the broader EU in terms of its target setting, also heavily reliant on nuclear. I mean, I have to say, 30 years on from the sort of the first spike of the anti-nuclear debate in Australia, you'd be hard-pressed to find an Australian family that hasn't been touched by cancer and hasn't had nuclear medicine involved in the treatment of cancer. And people understand that there is a reactor, Lucas Heights in Sydney, that's been managed very well now for nearly 40 years. So I think this is a debate that has a long way to go in terms of maturing, but I don't think the Australian people has the rampant opposition that they might have had when we were talking about this much earlier in our history. I want to go into an issue. Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack, now, call me cynical, but this looks like it might have been a bit of a sinecure, a bit of a gravy train trip to buy some votes, but he's come under fire for a decision to send Cowper MP Pat CONAGHAN to Stockholm for a global ministerial conference on road safety. McCormack couldn't go himself because he was fighting for his life, but off he sent a backbencher. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a good story from Jeff Chambers in The Australian, and he's had a good look at this, and it makes you wonder again if the Barnaby kind of forces aren't leaking against their leader, but it's one of a number of jobs or sinecures that were doled out in return for the support of McCormack, and we know that's one of the reasons Lou O'Brien left the Nats and ran as Deputy Speaker, is because he saw Damien Drum getting the Deputy Speaker's role. He was due to get it in return for his support. We've seen the Cabinet Ministers that were promoted very much McCormack supporters. Some conjecture Keith Pitt played a bit with both sides before committing to McCormack. So, again, it showed the potential closeness of the vote. I've said on your program before, Peter, that I believe it was around 11:10 the evening before, but then the numbers went over to McCormack from Joyce. And a lot of that was based on these jobs, and there was the conjecture at the time of the spill that Matt Kean might have made a mistake in resigning his cabinet position because that gave an extra job for Michael McCormack to promise.
A cabinet
and
job
that
to
helped
promise,
him in the
that's right.
vote as well. Yeah.
Yeah, look, and
So,
people at home might be thinking...
It doesn't pass the pub test.
No, and people at home might be thinking,
trip.
gee, you know, could you buy someone off with a trip to Stockholm? I mean, really, are they that craven? And I have to say, yes, they are, because, you know, I remember the Battle Royal when Tony Abbott said that they were no longer MPs flying at the front of the plane in first class. They had to fly business. Business was good enough for business. MPs didn't have to go first class. The number of fights, and it wasn't just about the MPs, it was about their wives and husbands also travelling with them, because that was rife until the rules were changed. But I could do a whole show on those sorts of stories. I'll hold back tonight, but it will come one time. Before we go, I said I'd come back to Mike Kelly. Now, there's talk, he's the member for the marginal seat of Eden Monaro. It was an old bellwether seat, although it's not always a bellwether. Kelly's from Labor and he held it this time, and the coalition won, so that's why I say it's not always a bellwether. Anyway, there's talk that he's going to go, and the one state seat that overlaps him is John Barilaro's. There's talk he'll run for a seat in the Canberra Federal Parliament. How true is that?
Well, Kelly didn't rule out when I spoke to him today and yesterday going, but he said it was his intention at the moment to stay till the next election, but he's got a couple of operations in the next couple of months, and he did say he was keeping an eye on his health. Certainly speculation is rampant that he might go and that Barilaro would run, and it might be a three-cornered contest with the Liberals. I'm certain if Mike Kelly were to retire mid-term, John Barilaro would run for the seat, and he would likely win it. That would give Scott Morrison an extra seat and a three-seat majority instead of a two-seat majority, but it would cause more troubles in the Nationals.
Yeah, it'd be big ructions. He would be a very big dog to enter Parliament there and into that National Party room. Could be very interesting. Andrew Clennell, thanks for your time.